Hello, and welcome to Dispatches from the Civil War, a podcast breaking down events of the American Civil War in real time, week by week. I'm your host, Logan, and this week is Prologue Part 2. In December of 1847, the idea of popular sovereignty will be developed by Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan. This is the idea that slavery should be left to the decision of the territorial government. Due to his influence, it will attract many supporters anxious to sidestep either the constitutional or the moral issues of slavery. Meanwhile, General Winfield Scott marches into Mexico City, ending the Mexican War in September of 1847. In February of 1848, the United States will sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which will officially end the war. The United States will get over 500,000 square miles that include what will become California, Nevada, Utah, most of New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Wyoming and Colorado. Texas is conceded as well, with the boundary being set at the Rio Grande. Now the United States is a transcontinental republic. However, I can imagine there are some politicians groaning in the back of their mind about the upcoming ordeal of deciding which states will be slave and which will be free. The idea of popular sovereignty will probably pop back up during the upcoming debates. In March, the Senate ratifies the treaty, and President Polk gets an appropriation bill to pay Mexico that does not have the Wilmot Proviso. Polk will later sign a bill organizing the Oregon Territory without slavery. Southern senators are conceding this territory with the understanding that other territory will fall into the slave category. After establishing a convention and adopting a constitution that forbids slavery, California asks for admission into the Union. President Zachary Taylor, hero of the Mexican War, will ask Congress to admit them as a state. Southerners object, as this will be another free state and leave slave states in the minority. Secession talk again comes up from the people like Calhoun, but Taylor says he will crush secession even if he himself has to take the field again. Pretty bold move. I can imagine that Andrew Jackson looks on and gives him a thumbs up. In January of 1850, Henry Clay, who has gotten to the end of his rope with extremists from both the North and the South who are threatening to resort to force, throws out one last compromise attempt. I guess he's been saving it up. His series of resolutions involve bringing in California as a free state on the grounds that this is its people's own wish. Please refer to popular sovereignty. No decision will be made at this time in regard to slavery in the other territory gained from Mexico, but it is made clear that will be made according to the settlers' wishes. Other resolutions include new fugitive slave laws and the barring of trade in slaves, but not slavery itself, from Washington, D.C. During February and March, the Senate will debate on these resolutions. However, the strongest advocates of both sides oppose compromise. Senator William Seward of New York will argue there is a higher law than the Constitution which regulates our authority. And Senator John Calhoun of South Carolina argues that not only must the North concede the right of extending slavery, but also cease the agitation of the slave question. Along with this, Senator Daniel Webster from Massachusetts, who has long been a political opponent of Clay and a moral opponent of slavery, will say, "I speak today for the preservation of the Union," and he goes on to argue that the North must be ready to accept even slavery for this cause. Webster does not convert everyone immediately, but the spirit of compromise is now abroad. In June, leaders from 9 southern states will meet in Nashville, Tennessee, to discuss the prevalent issues dividing the North and the South: slavery and states' rights. Some delegates will openly advocate for secession. The moderates prevail. A few modest resolutions will be adopted, for example, one that would extend the Missouri Compromise all the way to the Pacific Coast. In September, Congress will adopt 5 bills based on the Henry Clay resolutions, which collectively will be known as the Compromise of 1850. The one that will be an issue for the North is the Strict Fugitive Slave Act. President Millard Fillmore, who rose to the presidency after Taylor died in July, will sign all 3 acts. In November, Southern leaders will reconvene in Nashville, and this time the majority is held by the more extreme delegates. The talk of secession will be at the forefront. In December, Georgia will have a state convention that will vote to remain in the Union under the condition that if the Compromise of 1850 is not observed, they will secede. In June of 1851, Uncle Tom's Cabin begins to be serialized in the National Era newspaper. This paper is published in Washington, D.C. and is anti-slavery. By March of 1852, the complete novel is published in Boston, and within a year it will sell over 1 million copies and will be influential both North and South. That same year, Franklin Pierce will win the presidency over General Winfield Scott, who was the hero of the Mexican War. Pierce will run on a Democratic platform that supports the Compromise of 1850. In January of 1854, slavery will influence the route of the Transcontinental Railroad. Many want the route to go through their area of the country. Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois hopes to get the route through the Great Plains region and supports a bill that he hopes will win over proponents of the southern route. Those promoting the route south include the current Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis. Remember that name. Douglas agrees to divide the Central Territory into two, Kansas Territory and Nebraska Territory. The assumption is that one will be settled by pro-slavery people and the other by anti-slavery people. Douglas endorses the idea of popular sovereignty, which in effect will repeal the Missouri Compromise of 1820, as both Kansas and Nebraska lie above the latitude lines. Once again, a North versus South debate begins. The next month, the Republican Party will be founded as an anti-slavery party in Ripon, Wisconsin. In the following months, various other northern cities will join in the formation of the party. In April, the Immigrant Aid Society is formed in Massachusetts, which is to aid and encourage anti-slavery supporters to settle in Kansas so as to tip the balance so it can be a free state. Around 2,000 people will be part of this project. The following month, the Kansas-Nebraska Act will be adopted by Congress with a clear majority. This is not taken well in the North, leading to some to threaten to stop obeying the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. In July, a group of anti-slavery men meet to join the Republican Party in Michigan. They demand that both the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Fugitive Slave Law be repealed. Meanwhile, a land office is opened by the federal government to supervise the distribution of land. Pro- and anti-slavery settlers are staking claims and fighting each other with little regard for any laws, hence the description of Bleeding Kansas. Elections will be held in March of 1855, and several thousand pro-slavery Missourians cross over to vote. This will result in a pro-slavery legislature, which will be recognized by the federal governor of the territory. In July, the legislature will meet and adopt an extremely strict series of pro-slavery laws. They will also expel the anti-slavery legislature. Not to back down, Free Soil Kansas hold a convention in the fall of 1855. This group meets in Topeka and adopts a constitution that outlaws slavery. On the other hand, they will also adopt a law that bars all blacks from Kansas, proving you can't have it all. There are now clashes happening between pro- and anti-slavery elements in Kansas. This constitution will be approved in December. In May of 1856, Senator Charles Sumner from Massachusetts will deliver a speech against pro-slavery elements in the Senate. In one of the more wild events in this history of Congress, 3 days later, while Sumner is sitting at his Senate desk in the chamber, South Carolina Representative Preston Brooks will beat Sumner almost to death with a stick or cane, depending on the version of the story you hear. It will take Sumner 3 years to fully recover, and he is regarded as a martyr by Northern abolitionists. On the other hand, many Southerners will praise Congressman Brooks and send him canes. How tasteful. Meanwhile, in Kansas, pro-slavery men will attack Lawrence, which is the center for anti-slavery settlers. 1 person is killed. In retaliation, a band of anti-slavery men led by John Brown kill 5 pro-slavery men at Pottawatomie Creek. In July, the House will admit Kansas as a state with the anti-slavery Topeka Constitution, but the Senate will reject this and leave the issue open when Congress adjourns. I have a feeling that few have learned the lesson about ignoring things and hoping they will go away. In November, after a presidential campaign that has been directly pro-slavery and anti-slavery and North versus South, the Democratic candidate James Buchanan defeats John Fremont, the Republican candidate. The following year in March, the Supreme Court will hand down a decision that will have ramifications across the political spectrum. In the Dred Scott case, a majority declared that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 is unconstitutional. Dred Scott had been taken from the slave state of Missouri into the free state of Illinois. Scott argued that he should be free on this account. The court rules that Scott never ceased to be a slave, so he could not be considered a citizen with the right to sue in a federal court. Another part of the ruling states that Congress has no right to deprive citizens of their property, such as slaves, anywhere within the United States. As one can imagine, Republicans and Northerners are none too pleased with this ruling. It will also age like buttermilk in a hot summer sun. Returning to Kansas at the end of 1857, a pro-slavery constitution is approved by the territorial legislature. This will be rejected by Kansasans, but President Buchanan will ask Congress to admit the state under this constitution. After quite a bit of pushback, a bill is passed by Congress to allow for another popular vote by Kansas on their constitution. Based on the experiences, I doubt this will be a calm affair. In June of 1858, the Republican Party of Illinois nominates a former one-term representative, Abraham Lincoln, to challenge the incumbent Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Douglas is personally opposed to slavery, but has tried to play both sides of the issue to hold the Democratic Party together. His push for popular sovereignty has mostly antagonized most of the pro-slavery Democrats from the South. Lincoln directly picks a lane by asserting, "I believe this government cannot endure permanently half-slave and half-free." These two will have a series of 7 debates from August to October. Douglas will try to placate his own party, and Lincoln will make a strong stand against slavery. Douglas will be elected senator by the Democratic majority in the Illinois legislature. At this point in time, representatives were elected by popular vote of the people, and senators were elected by the legislature of each state. Though he loses the race, this will propel Lincoln to the national spotlight as a respected spokesman for the anti-slavery position. Previously, in 1854, Sherman Booth had been arrested for violating the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Eventually, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that the law was unconstitutional and affirmed the release of Booth. Eventually, the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they ruled that the Wisconsin court had overstepped its jurisdiction by trying to annul federal law. This not only upheld Booth's arrest, but also confirmed the constitutionality of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Considering past events, it is a bit atypical that an anti-slave state would be asserting its rights over the federal government. Just to show that cooler heads are not prevailing down south, the Southern Commercial Convention opens in May of 1859. They kick things off by voting to approve the following. In the opinion of this convention, all laws, state or federal, prohibiting the African slave trade ought to be repealed. The group is committed to reopening the African slave trade. In October, while Kansas is voting to ratify an anti-slavery constitution, John Brown begins his raid in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His goal is to begin a slave uprising similar to the Haitian Revolution. Within 24 hours, Brown and his few remaining supporters are contained in an engine house. A detachment of Marines, led by Colonel Robert E. Lee, would capture Brown and his group. 6 weeks later, Brown is tried for criminal conspiracy and treason, convicted, and hanged in Charlestown, Virginia. Just like today, the raid is divisive across the country. Northerners condemn the way and methods that Brown executed his plan, while Southerners note that many Northerners celebrate and admire Brown and his goals. Before his execution, he handed a piece of paper to his jailer that reads, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood." In February of 1860, Senator Jefferson Davis from Mississippi, remember him, presents resolutions to affirm that the federal government cannot prohibit slavery in the territories and also protect slaveholders there. Davis does not have high hopes of this passing, but rather wants to commit the Democratic Party against Stephen Douglas and the concept of popular sovereignty. This does not entirely come to pass when the Democrat Party holds its convention in Charleston, South Carolina, and a pro-slavery platform is rejected. Delegates from 8 southern states depart, and the remaining delegates are not able to agree on a candidate, forcing the convention to adjourn. Meanwhile, the Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln as its presidential candidate. To gain the nomination, Lincoln must present himself as a moderate on the question of slavery. The party's platform is in favor of prohibiting slavery in the territories only and against interfering with slavery in the states. The Democratic Party will reconvene in June to have another try at establishing a presidential candidate. Anti-Douglas forces walk out, which results in him being nominated for the presidency. Later, Southern Democrats will convene again in Baltimore and nominate John C. Breckinridge on a platform that calls for the protection of the right to own slaves. Thus, the campaign devolves into a matter over slavery above all else. Extremists fan the fears on both sides of the issue. Stephen Douglas travels to all sections of the country in an attempt to broaden his appeal. He realizes that the attempt is lost due to the split within his own party. Various spokesmen make it clear that secession will follow if Lincoln is elected. But who would be worried about that, considering how many times the same cry of wolf has gone up at various times in the previous decades? In November, Abraham Lincoln will be elected president with a clear majority of the Electoral College, but only a plurality of the popular vote. Despite having a much subdued message attacking slavery, there is no doubt that for the first time in the history of the young country, there is a president that declares the normal condition of all territory of the United States is that of freedom. Within days of Lincoln's election, Southern leaders are speaking of secession as inevitable. But would they? In December of 1860, South Carolina is the first state to follow through on the threat of secession. Meanwhile, Congress convenes in an attempt to work out some type of compromise. John C. Crittenden, a member of the Senate's committee, introduces a series of proposals, the chief one calling for a constitutional amendment that restores the Missouri Compromise across the continent and for all time. Although Crittenden and many other proposals will be tough brought before both chambers, they will be ineffectual in the face of coming events. Members of President Buchanan's cabinet are quitting during December to protest either his actions and/or his lack of actions. During this time, Major Robert A. Anderson, who is in command of the federal forts in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, moves his entire force to the larger and more defensible of the two, Fort Sumter. A delegation from South Carolina comes to Washington to demand that President Buchanan remove all federal troops from Charleston. Buchanan, who has always been sympathetic to the Southern position on slavery and states' rights, cannot accede to such a demand. He announces that Fort Sumter will be defended against any hostile attacks from whatever quarter, and authorizes preparation of a relief expedition by sea. Meanwhile, President-elect Lincoln tries to avoid taking any position so as not to escalate the situation. However, he has made it clear that, let there be no compromise on the question of extending slavery. The President-elect will send representatives to Charleston to inform Governor Pickens that an attempt will be made to supply Fort Sumter with provision only, and that, if such attempt be not resisted, no effort to throw in men, arms, or ammunition will be made. And that's where things stand as we come to a close of 1860. One state has seceded, the current president seems unwilling to act, the incoming president is not received well below the Mason-Dixon line, and temperatures are running hot everywhere. Could it be that such a young nation could be ripped apart by armed conflict? Starting with the next episode, we will follow events as they unfold in the opening days of the year 1861. I'll see you then.